They thought the hard part was over. The rich wife was gone, and all that stood between them and millions was a visit to the insurance office. But what happened behind those glass doors shattered everything they had planned. Subscribe for more and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Muir residence in the northern quarter of Atlanta, casting a soft golden light over a pristine kitchen where everything gleamed. Jasmine Muir stood barefoot on the tiled floor, a mug of black coffee in hand, watching a robin dart through the thick magnolia branches outside. She liked the mornings best, when the house was quiet, and the world hadn't yet tried to make her smaller than she was. She took a long sip, closed her eyes, and allowed herself a few seconds of silence before the performance began. Nathan Brower entered the kitchen moments later, crisp and polished, as if the day had been waiting for him to begin. His presence was deliberate, practiced, not unlike the way he used to enter courtrooms. The tailored shirt hugged his lean frame and his shoes clicked softly against the tile. He kissed her on the cheek, an automatic gesture, precise but devoid of warmth. Jasmine didn't flinch, but her lips didn't lift either. "You've got that charity thing today?" he asked, pouring himself coffee. "The literacy fund," she replied without looking at him. "Downtown at 2. He nodded, scrolling through his phone. "I've got back-to-back calls. The boards is moving up the quarterly review." Jasmine stirred her coffee absent-mindedly, listening to the clink of the spoon against porcelain. The familiarity between them was brittle now, like an overplayed role in a fading stage production. They still performed the marriage, the partnership, the success story, but the script had worn thin. They had been the golden couple once, or at least that was the narrative the city liked to believe. She, a self-made black woman who built one of the region's most influential marketing firms before the age of 35. He, a white attorney with pedigree, charm, and connections, who left private law to manage strategic investments. They met at a gala, aligned themselves publicly and professionally, and, in the eyes of many, symbolized progress, an interracial union that seemed to transcend the old world's bitterness. But inside the walls of their perfect home, the seams were fraying. When they were alone, silence lingered in the air too long. Conversations ended before they began. His voice, once full of admiration, now carried restraint. Her gaze, once full of belief, now held calculation. Jasmine had always known she'd be alone at the top. But she hadn't expected the loneliness to come from inside her own home. That afternoon, she sat at the head table at the literacy benefit, graciously accepting handshakes, compliments, and praise she no longer believed in. She posed for photos, laughed at appropriate moments, and delivered a keynote that had women in the front row wiping tears. She knew how to command a room. She knew how to inspire. It had once felt like purpose. Now it felt like obligation. Nathan wasn't there. He had begged off with a vague mention of calls and client reports. She hadn't asked for more. She no longer expected more. On the other side of town, in a private suite at a boutique hotel, Nathan lay beside a woman whose soft voice and quiet laughter offered him a life without confrontation. Laura Pierce was 29, light-skinned, soft-spoken, with the kind of easy warmth that Nathan mistook for peace. A nurse by trade, she had met him through his mother's hospice care. What began as gratitude had quietly bled into flirtation, then familiarity, then something else altogether. Laura rested a hand on her abdomen, not yet rounded but beginning to firm. "She's got your nose," she said softly. Nathan smiled, eyes closed. "You're sure it's a girl?" "I feel it." Nurse's intuition. He let out a contented sigh, tracing a fingertip along her wrist. After all this is over, he murmured, we'll be somewhere else. Somewhere quiet. Just us. Laura believed him, believed in their quiet future, one free of Jasmine's sharp tongue, of the suffocating perfection, of the racial and social expectations he never admitted had begun to feel like chains. Nathan hadn't always felt that way. When he first met Jasmine, he had been drawn to her intensity, her fire. But over time, her activism began to grate on him. The speeches, the panels, the constant presence of race and justice at the dinner table. He had told himself he admired it, but secretly he began to resent it. Not because she was wrong, but because her voice made his feel smaller. He never said it aloud, but inside he simmered. Why couldn't she just be his wife and not the world's? That resentment, unspoken and festering, had become a quiet justification. His love for Laura wasn't born purely from affection. It was born from escape. She didn't ask him hard questions. She didn't make him examine himself. 3 months ago, Jasmine found the first message, a single text that had no business being there. She said nothing. Then a second. Then a photograph. Laura in Nathan's phone, tucked away in a folder marked Finances. She still didn't speak of it, but she changed the locks on their shared savings accounts. She scheduled a meeting with her lawyer, and 3 weeks before her death, she made a private update to her will. She had once said to Nathan during one of their rare honest nights, "The world will forgive your betrayal long before it forgives my anger." At the time, he had laughed it off, but the words lingered. 2 days before her trip to the lake house, Jasmine visited a storage unit she rarely used. Inside was a small desk, a laptop, a hard drive, her sanctuary. She opened the laptop, clicked open a recording app, and stared into the screen. "I'm not afraid," she began, "but I'm tired. Tired of pretending, tired of making people comfortable with my presence. I've built something that matters. But I don't know if that's enough to keep me safe." She paused, pressing her fingers to her temple. "If anything happens to me, don't believe the official story, not right away." She closed the laptop. On the morning of her final trip, Jasmine left their shared house at 6:15 a.m. She kissed Nathan goodbye without waiting for him to wake. The lake house sat on the edge of Lake Oconee, 2 hours from Atlanta, tucked among the trees with a private dock and her yacht, the Perseverance, anchored beneath a cloudless sky. She spent the day in solitude, walked the shoreline, made tea, wrote in her notebook, and by sunset she had prepared the boat. No one saw her leave the dock. Just after midnight, a fisherman spotted the Perseverance adrift with its lights on. Inside, no one. Hours later, her body was recovered from the shallows. No signs of trauma, no note, no witnesses. The sheriff's report labeled it an accident. A slip, perhaps. Dizziness. Maybe alcohol. She had been alone, they said. Nathan, in a somber suit, accepted the news with restraint. Jasmine valued her privacy, he told reporters. She loved the water. We're devastated by this tragedy. Laura watched the broadcast from Nathan's apartment, hand resting on her stomach. "She's really gone," she said aloud, as if trying to believe it. Nathan didn't answer. He stood by the window, staring into the distance. Behind his stillness, something else was taking shape. He hadn't killed Jasmine, not with his hands. But in the dark corners of his mind, he had wondered, what if she just disappeared? What if fate intervened? And now that she had, perhaps it was only right to move forward. After all, accidents happen, life goes on, especially for those left behind. The paperwork for the insurance policy had already been reviewed. $7 million, double indemnity for accidental death. He only needed to wait. But across the city, in a modest apartment filled with books and candles, Jasmine's sister, Nicole, opened the final voicemail her sister had sent her. The voice was calm, steady, and haunting. If something happens, look in the red envelope, in the top drawer. And remember, my life was never small, and I will not let my death be. The church bells rang at noon, echoing through the historic district of Atlanta like a metronome marking the rhythm of mourning. The sanctuary of Mount Calvary Church was filled to capacity, the air heavy with perfume, hushed whispers, and the low thrum of sorrow. Jasmine Muir's casket sat beneath a cascade of white lilies and deep purple orchids, her favorite colors. A giant portrait stood beside it. Jasmine, mid-laugh, wind in her hair, eyes bright and fearless. It was the image of a woman who had lived on her terms. The mourners came in droves, colleagues, friends, activists, journalists, political figures, even rivals, all offering condolences, thin smiles, and sometimes real tears. Nathan stood at the front of the church in a tailored black suit, his expression composed, his posture impeccable. He accepted hugs, clasped hands, and murmured thanks with solemn gravity. No one could accuse him of disrespect, yet to those who had known Jasmine well, something about his demeanor felt rehearsed. Not insincere, exactly, but too smooth, too practiced. His grief had the polish of a public statement, not the rawness of loss. Nicole Muir, seated in the front pew with tightly folded hands, watched him with a gaze sharpened by suspicion. Her sister's death still rang in her ears like a false note in a familiar song. Jasmine had always been careful, always calculating. She didn't take risk lightly. She didn't drink alone on boats. She didn't just fall into lakes in the middle of the night. The eulogies were beautiful. Colleagues spoke of Jasmine's leadership, her passion for justice, her relentless belief in equity. A city councilwoman wept through her remembrance, recalling Jasmine's early work on voting access initiatives. Nathan stepped up to the podium last. His voice trembled at first, just enough to make his grief seem palpable. "She was the fiercest person I ever met," he said, "and the kindest. Jasmine taught me how to stand in truth, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard." His hands gripped the edges of the podium as he paused for effect. "I didn't deserve her, but I loved her every day." A single tear slipped down his cheek. A woman in the third pew dabbed at her eyes. Nicole didn't move. She wasn't convinced. Later, at the reception, Nathan moved through the room like a dignitary, accepting condolences, sipping club soda, making small talk with people he barely knew. Everyone said the same things. She was extraordinary. She left too soon. She'll never be forgotten. He responded as expected, thanking them, nodding gravely. Laura was not there. He had insisted she stay away from the service. Her presence would be too soon, too dangerous. But she watched from a distance, seated in her parked car a block away, her stomach twisting as she watched the mourners stream out onto the steps. She was 5 months along now. The curve of her belly was no longer subtle. Inside, Nicole found herself cornered by a tall, elegant woman with sharp cheekbones and a crisp charcoal blazer. "Nicole Muir?" she asked, extending a hand. "I'm Talia James. I work with Crestfield Insurance. I'm assigned to Jasmine's policy review." Nicole hesitated, then shook her hand. "I thought the case was closed. They said it was an accident." Talia gave a faint smile. "We always do our due diligence. It's a large policy. These things require scrutiny." Nicole studied her. You don't think it was an accident? I didn't say that. You didn't have to. They exchanged numbers, and as Talia drifted away into the crowd, Nicole felt a spark of something she hadn't felt since the night of the call from the sheriff's office. Hope that the truth might still have a voice. Later that week, in her quiet office lined with files and discreet plaques, Talia began her investigation in earnest. She had seen hundreds of cases in her 10 years with Crestfield: accidental drownings, sudden illnesses, fires with murky causes. But something about this one was different. The timeline, the policy changes, the precision with which Jasmine had updated her affairs, the recent severance of her longtime legal counsel. It didn't smell like coincidence. The policy in question was substantial. $7 million, with a double indemnity clause that would trigger a full $14 million if the death was classified as accidental. Just 8 weeks before her death, Jasmine had amended the policy to clarify that any death not caused by illness would qualify for full payment, even under ambiguous circumstances. The language was legal, precise, and left little room for denial. But there were details. Quiet ones. The GPS logs of the boat had shown the navigation system had been accessed remotely via app just minutes before the boat was found adrift. Only 2 devices had access. One of them had been Jasmine's phone, found waterlogged on the deck. The other was Nathan's. When Talia requested Nathan's phone records, she found gaps, deleted entries, a lack of metadata. He claimed it had been replaced weeks earlier due to water damage. The new device had no trace of the yacht's navigation software. She interviewed the maintenance technician responsible for the lake house and its assets. He confirmed the yacht's software had been updated just days before the incident. Mrs. Muir said she wanted the system to be more responsive, he recalled. Said she had a trip planned and wanted everything running smooth. Laura, meanwhile, had begun to unravel. The attention, though minimal for now, made her uneasy. She was not a woman used to scrutiny. A local blogger had posted a blurry photo of her leaving Nathan's residence, speculating about the mystery blonde seen in the window. She avoided grocery stores, skipped her shift at the clinic, and began spending more time in hiding than in hope. One evening, as she sat in Nathan's living room, her feet propped on a cushion, she asked the question that had been nesting in her mind for weeks. "You're sure she didn't know?" Nathan, seated across from her with a glass of whiskey, didn't answer right away. "She suspected something," he said finally, "but she never confronted me." Laura looked down at her belly. "What if she knew more than you thought?" Nathan's jaw tightened. "Does it matter? She's gone. But the insurance, the investigation, they could dig into everything. They won't find anything." Laura wanted to believe him, but his confidence no longer soothed her the way it once had. At the same time, Nicole began to dig through Jasmine's old apartment, the one she kept for thinking space, a studio tucked above an old bookstore. It was sparse but elegant, filled with books, notebooks, and a locked drawer. Nicole remembered Jasmine mentioning a passcode once, a birthday. She tried their mother's, March 12th. The lock clicked open. Inside were documents, a flash drive, and a letter addressed to Nicole. She opened the letter first. "If you're reading this," it began, "something has gone wrong, or maybe it went exactly as I feared. Either way, I need you to know the truth. I've made mistakes. I've trusted the wrong people, but I've always known when to prepare." Nicole read the rest in silence, her throat tightening with every sentence. The letter didn't accuse directly, but it painted a picture of betrayal, of manipulation, of fear disguised as composure. Jasmine had been many things. Naive was never one of them. She plugged the flash drive into her laptop. Video files, 5 in total, all recorded within the last month of Jasmine's life. Each was a message, not of panic, but of calculation. Jasmine detailed changes to her will, described her concerns, spoke of a growing certainty that she was not just being betrayed, but observed. She didn't name Nathan directly, but the implications were unmistakable. Nicole sent the files to Talia that same night. By the end of the week, Talia had a timeline. The financial adjustments, the legal separations, the software update, the trip to the lake house. And now, the video evidence. It wasn't enough for a murder charge, but it was enough to suggest that Jasmine had not died by chance. She had been maneuvered, intentionally or not, toward an edge, and someone had made sure she fell. The official story remained unchanged, but whispers began to spread. Laura, now in her 6th month, found herself alone more often. Nathan had grown distant, preoccupied with meetings, calls, and silent drives. The promise of a new life together felt like a fade-in echo. One afternoon, she opened his laptop while he was in the shower. His email was open, a thread with a name she didn't recognize, an attorney in New York. The subject line, asset division and liability projection. She closed the laptop before reading more, but the unease in her stomach had nothing to do with pregnancy. On the first Monday of the next month, Nicole held a small press conference outside the Foundation headquarters. She didn't reveal everything, only that questions remained, that Jasmine's voice would not be silenced, that the fight for answers had just begun. The crowd was small, but the impact was real. That same day, Talia submitted her full report to Crestfield Insurance. She stopped short of recommending claim denial, but flagged the case for further review. The probability of undisclosed influencing factors is high, she wrote, pending legal clarification. In Nathan's inbox, a new message arrived from the claims department. Subject: policy suspension, further investigation required. He read the message in silence, his jaw clenched. Behind him, Laura stood in the doorway, watching. Jasmine's absence had never felt more present. And for the first time, the world around Nathan began to lean in, listening not to the words he spoke, but to the silence he'd left behind. The Atlanta sky hung low and colorless in the early hours of the morning as the city stirred to life beneath its weight. Talia James sat at her kitchen table, a cup of tea cooling beside her laptop, the glow of the screen reflecting in her tired eyes. She had read and reread the final report she was preparing for Crestfield Insurance, each line weighed with care and precision. The evidence was still circumstantial, but when stacked together, it formed a shape too distinct to ignore. Something had been orchestrated. Something had been pushed. Across town, Nathan sat alone in the living room of what had once been a shared home and now felt like a holding cell. He stared into the flickering silence of the television, the sound turned off. Laura had gone to her prenatal appointment alone that morning after an argument that had left the house brittle with unspoken words. She had grown distant, prickled with nervous energy and subtle suspicion. Nathan had noticed her watching him when she thought he wasn't looking, her eyes always lingering a little too long, her hands resting protectively over her swelling stomach like a shield. The call from Crestfield came at noon. The claim had been frozen pending a joint investigation with local authorities. There would be an in-person review. Nathan didn't respond right away. He simply stared at the screen, the notification like a thunderclap in a windless sky. When he finally closed the message, he sat still for a long time, then opened a locked folder on his hard drive labeled Home Improvements. Inside was a collection of files, contracts, scanned documents, and beneath them, a document titled 290 Curvature Study. He opened it, though he knew every word by memory. It was a topographical analysis of a stretch of Highway 290 near Lake Oconee, the curve where Jasmine had driven hours before her death. The report had been created by a private consultant Nathan had paid under a pseudonym, routed through a shell company linked to a dormant LLC. He had told himself it was curiosity, a professional analysis, a safety check, but in truth he had wanted to know, to understand how someone might not make it back, to study what the accident might look like, how sudden, how devastating, how clean. In another part of the city, Nicole met with Talia in a quiet booth at a coffee shop tucked between a bookstore and an antique shop. Nicole had dark circles under her eyes, her hair pulled into a tight knot, her voice low and calm. She handed Talia a sealed envelope. "I found this in Jasmine's safe deposit box," she said. It was labeled only with today's date. Talia opened it carefully. Inside was a single-page letter and a second flash drive. The letter was addressed to Talia by name. "If you're reading this, then something I feared has already begun. I don't trust systems to protect the truth, but I trust you to find it." The drive contained audio files, phone recordings mostly. Jasmine had used an app that automatically recorded all calls for her personal notes, something she had mentioned once in a speech about executive time management. Most of the files were innocuous, but two stood out. The first was a call between Jasmine and Laura, dated just a few days before her death. The tone was composed but icy. "I know about you," Jasmine said calmly. "You don't have to deny it." There was a long pause, then Laura's voice, faint and hesitant. "I didn't mean—" "It doesn't matter what you meant," Jasmine interrupted. "What matters is that I'm not stupid. I've known for months. I waited to see what Nathan would do. He did exactly what I expected." "I'm sorry." "No, you're not. And I'm not interested in apologies. I want to meet." The second file was from the day before Jasmine died, a conversation with her doctor. The voice on the other end, female, clinical, yet softened by familiarity. "The results confirm what we suspected," the doctor said. "The early onset marker is present. Based on your family history and symptoms, I believe you're in the initial stages." "How long?" Jasmine asked, her voice low. "Without aggressive treatment, a year, maybe less. And with it, 2 to 3 at most, but there will be progression, memory, coordination, cognitive function." Jasmine exhaled slowly. "I watched my mother disappear. I won't do that again." "You have options." "Do I?" After the call ended, there was silence on the recording for several seconds before Jasmine's voice returned, quiet and raw. "I won't die waiting for permission." Talia sat back in her seat, the implications settling over her like fog. Jasmine hadn't just been afraid of betrayal, she had been afraid of deterioration, of becoming unrecognizable to herself, of losing the agency she had built her life around. At the same time, Laura sat in the nursery they had begun to decorate, her hands trembling as she folded a baby blanket. Her phone buzzed, another text from Nicole. They had spoken only once, but the conversation haunted her. She knew, all of it, and she was right. Laura had denied everything, but now she couldn't stop thinking about that last morning, the meeting Jasmine had demanded. They met at a cafe on South Lamar, a quiet place with large windows and smooth jazz drifting through the air. Jasmine had arrived precisely on time, composed, immaculate, and cool. "I'm not here to threaten you," she had said. "I'm here to make an offer." Laura hadn't known what to expect, but it wasn't that. "I'm dying," Jasmine continued. "You can believe that or not, but it's true, and I don't intend to do it slowly." Laura's eyes had widened, panic flickering across her face. "I know, Nathan," Jasmine said. "He's too careful. He'd never make a move unless he thought the world would cover for him. So I'm giving him exactly what he's been waiting for. An accident." Laura had shaken her head, visibly distressed. "You can't mean that." "I do, and I have conditions." Jasmine had laid them out like a contract. Laura and Nathan would let the world believe it was an accident. They would take the money, leave the city, and raise the child away from the mess they had made. And Laura would leave Nathan within the year. She would not tie herself to him forever. Jasmine had looked her in the eye, steady and unflinching. "He's not what you think he is, and he will ruin you." Laura had nodded, dazed and overwhelmed, her voice no more than a whisper. "I never wanted this." Jasmine had stood, left enough cash on the table to cover both their drinks, and walked away. Back in the present, Laura pulled out her phone and opened a new message to Talia. Her thumbs hovered over the keyboard, uncertain. She wanted to confess something, anything, but the fear of what might happen kept her fingers frozen. Meanwhile, Talia presented her findings to the lead investigator at the Atlanta Police Department. The recordings, the timeline, the policy changes, the appointment logs, the meeting with Laura, all of it. Still, the lead detective hesitated. "Without physical evidence," he said, "we don't have enough to charge. It's murky, especially if the victim planned it." "She planned it because she saw no other way out," Talia argued. "That doesn't make it suicide, that makes it coerced." The detective shook his head. "The DA won't go for it." Frustrated, Talia turned to Nicole. "We need something concrete, something irrefutable." Nicole paused, thinking, "I might know where to find it." 2 days later, she returned with another flash drive, recovered from Jasmine's old office at the foundation, hidden behind a false panel in the desk. The contents were staggering. A video diary Jasmine had recorded over several weeks. In it, she documented her illness, her suspicions, her steps to secure evidence, and most damningly, her search history. She showed how she had discovered Nathan's detailed files about Highway 290. She spoke of emails, deleted messages she had recovered, and the final conversation with Laura. The last entry was dated the night before she left for the lake house. "I want this to be clear," she said, staring into the camera. "If this looks like an accident, it's because I wanted it that way. But not because I slipped, because I chose it. Because the people closest to me left me with nothing but performance and pretense. Because I refused to die slowly, erased piece by piece. If I go, let it mean something. Let them feel the weight of what they've done. Let them know they didn't get away with it." Nicole watched the entire thing without blinking. "I'm ready," she said to Talia. "Let's go public." The next morning, the video aired on a local news affiliate. The fallout was immediate. Public opinion split like glass under pressure. Some saw Jasmine as a martyr, a woman who refused to be silenced, who turned her own death into a final act of justice. Others saw a troubled figure unraveling under the weight of illness and betrayal. But no one could ignore her anymore. The police reopened the investigation. Nathan was summoned for questioning. Laura was approached for cooperation. The insurance claim was formally denied, pending criminal inquiry, and Talia, standing outside the precinct beneath a slate-gray sky, felt the full weight of the truth. Jasmine had orchestrated her death, but not to vanish. She had done it to be heard. And now, finally, the world was listening. The storm that followed Jasmine's final video consumed Atlanta like a slow-burning fire, steady and deliberate. It began with whispers in the press, morning anchors tripping over their words as they aired the haunting footage, talk show pundits speculating over ethics, morality, and manipulation. Then came the flood of op-eds, each claiming a different moral high ground. Jasmine as martyr, Jasmine as tragic manipulator, Jasmine as a woman abandoned not only by her husband, but by a world unwilling to believe her until she was dead. But no matter how the narrative bent in public, the legal machine had only one path forward. The Atlanta District Attorney's Office, forced to respond to the storm of public attention and the damning evidence released by Nicole and Talia, reopened the investigation into Jasmine Muir's death, this time under a new charge: criminal conspiracy and involuntary manslaughter. It was a compromise, a legal strategy shaped by a defense that would argue Jasmine had acted of her own will, and a prosecution determined to hold someone accountable for the conditions that pushed her there. Nathan was arrested 2 weeks later. The footage of him being led from his home in handcuffs circled the internet in minutes. He wore the same stoic expression he had carried since the funeral, but the mask had begun to slip. His eyes darted too quickly, his shoulders too tense. Laura watched the coverage from her sister's house, her face pale and drawn, her hands trembling as she gripped a throw pillow to her chest. She was 7 months along now, and the baby inside her moved constantly, as if echoing the chaos outside. Laura had been granted immunity in exchange for her full cooperation. The deal came with conditions: full testimony, disclosure of all communications with Nathan, and agreement to submit all devices for forensic analysis. She signed the agreement in silence, her signature shaky but final. She didn't ask about the future. She didn't ask about Nathan. She only asked if she could see her baby when it was over. At the courthouse, media trucks lined the sidewalk, their satellite dishes pointed skyward like mechanical sunflowers. Journalists filed daily updates. Court TV streamed the proceedings. Every day, Nicole arrived in a pressed black suit, her expression unyielding, her grief transformed into something colder: resolve. Talia sat beside her in the gallery, flanked by members of Jasmine's foundation and former colleagues, their presence a quiet but unwavering demand for justice. Inside the courtroom, the trial unfolded with the grim rhythm of inevitability. The prosecution opened with Jasmine's videos, her voice echoing through the chamber like a ghost who had outlived her body. The jury watched in silence as she spoke of her illness, her fear, and the calculations she had uncovered. There were audible gasps when she spoke of the curve on Highway 290, her tone flat and chilling. Then came the documents. The insurance policy Nathan had modified in quiet increments. The emails traced to shell companies and private consultants. The research into accidental death patterns, liability-proof curves, and vehicle control in weather conditions. The files were damning not because they proved a murder, but because they illustrated a mind that had considered, calculated, and prepared for death, someone else's. Nathan's defense rested on the argument of passivity. He hadn't acted, he hadn't pushed, Jasmine had chosen. The defense attorney, an experienced litigator from New York, painted Jasmine as a brilliant but unraveling woman, a victim of a terminal diagnosis, yes, but also of her own intensity, her own need for control. She was dying, the attorney said. She was alone. She made a decision. My client is guilty only of failing to save a woman determined not to be saved. It was a performance almost as rehearsed as Nathan's expressions. Laura's testimony shifted the tone. She entered the courtroom in a simple navy dress, her belly prominent, her voice soft but steady. She answered every question, even when it hurt. She confirmed the affair, the conversations, the plan to leave after the insurance claim. She confirmed that Nathan had studied the curve, that he had sent messages implying a change was coming. She admitted she had known, deep down, that Jasmine's death wasn't just chance. "But I didn't believe she'd really go through with it," she said, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I thought it was a threat. I thought it was a test. I was wrong." The prosecution asked her about the meeting with Jasmine. She recounted it in full. Jasmine's calmness, her demands, her warning. "She told me to leave him," Laura said, "that he would destroy me, that the only way to survive was to walk away." The defense attempted to discredit her, citing her immunity deal, her romantic involvement, her emotional instability. But the jury watched her with something that resembled pity. She was not the villain of this story. She was the wreckage. In a twist no one saw coming, Nicole took the stand in the trial's final week. She read from Jasmine's diary, excerpts not previously shared with the public. One passage described a dream Jasmine had about her own funeral, where people praised her in death but had ignored her in life. Another described Nathan's growing coldness, his need for control, his resentment toward her work. "She saw what was coming," Nicole said, "and she tried to prepare for it the only way she knew how, by controlling her ending." The closing arguments were delivered under a sky-threatening rain. The courthouse was packed, the air inside taut with anticipation. The prosecution argued that Nathan Brower may not have wielded a weapon, but he had constructed the environment, the emotional and psychological architecture that led Jasmine to step into her grave. "Neglect can be violence," the prosecutor said. "Silence can be complicit. Calculation can be lethal." The defense, in contrast, leaned into the technical. "No murder occurred," the attorney said. "There is no physical evidence of coercion, no confession, no direct action. We are here because of suspicion and grief, not fact." The jury deliberated for 3 days. On the fourth morning, they returned. Nathan stood as the foreperson read the verdict. "On the charge of criminal conspiracy leading to involuntary manslaughter, we find the defendant guilty." There was no outburst, no cry, only silence. Nathan closed his eyes. Laura wept silently in the gallery. Nicole's face didn't move, but her hands, folded in her lap, trembled. The sentence was handed down 2 weeks later, 15 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 10. A reduced sentence, some argued, given the gravity of the outcome, but others saw it as a victory, not in years served, but in truth acknowledged. The court acknowledged Jasmine's voice. That was what mattered most to Nicole. After the trial, Jasmine's foundation was renamed the Muir Legacy Project, and its mission expanded to include mental health support for Black women diagnosed with terminal illness. Nicole took over as director. Talia joined the board. Together, they created a grant in Jasmine's name, one designed to give women facing impossible choices the resources to reclaim control. Laura gave birth a month after sentencing, a baby girl, healthy, with a quiet disposition and wide, watchful eyes. She named her Maya, not after anyone, just a name that felt soft enough to carry a future. Laura moved to Savannah, far from the headlines and whispers. She raised Maya with the help of her sister, working at a community clinic and attending therapy weekly. She didn't visit Nathan in prison. She never wrote. She told Maya stories about courage and mistakes and the importance of listening to others and to oneself. Nathan served his sentence quietly. He kept to himself, avoided fights, worked in the prison's library. He never appealed. In his cell, he kept a single photograph. Jasmine, in her early 30s, standing in front of a mural she had sponsored, a storm of color behind her, her arms folded, her smile unshakable. It wasn't guilt that kept the photo. It was the acknowledgement that she had won, not in life, but in the legacy she left behind. In Atlanta, the mural still stood. People left flowers at its base on her birthday, on the anniversary of her death. And every so often, a young woman would stand before it, reading the inscription at its base, "I will not die waiting for permission to matter." Jasmine Muir. If you found this story compelling, make sure to subscribe for more. Check out the next video and explore others on the channel. And if this resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it.